Happy Easter. I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad to be here. I want to begin by sharing a mantra with you. And the mantra that I want to share is in the form of a question. But before I ask the question, I want you to reflect in silence just for a moment and instruct yourself again what it is that you understand a mantra to be. Like other words, karma, dharma, the word mantra has entered our lexicon. You have some idea what a mantra is. I've been to India as a pilgrim, I've been to India as a student, and so I can give you a very precise derivation of the word from the Sanskrit. Manas means mind. Trayate means to deliver. That which delivers the mind from fear, from sorrow, from inertia. That is a mantra. And I want to talk a little bit about different categories of mantras because I'm going to ask a question, a mantra, to set the stage for talking about the significance of the resurrection of Christ, the celebration of Easter, the mission of Jesus in the world, and its relevance to us today. So there are 5 different categories of mantras. A mantra can be a scientific healing affirmation. For example, radiant healing light courses through every fiber of my being. If we repeat such a phrase, that's mantric meditation. Or, I am joy. That can be a mantra. Another category, a second category, is catalytic queries. Koans in the tradition of Zen. For example, what is the sound of one hand? Clapping. Or a conundrum like, the cup is full. A third category of mantra would be a healing sound vibration that's supra-rational. Like, for example, Om. Om doesn't have a meaning. It's not a word associated with meaning. It's beyond meaning, and yet it has potency to awaken healing. A fourth is a phrase that denotes an attribute or attributes of Source or of God. An example of such would be, I am that I am. This phrase conveys an attribute of the Source, of God. And finally, there are direct, intimate names of God that are used as mantras. And an example I give is Radha Kanta. Radha is the name for the original goddess, and Radha Kanta means the lover of the original goddess, or the lover of the supreme goddess, the lover of she who is mother of all. So the mantra that I want to open with is in the form of a catalytic query. And here it is. What is it that I am pretending to not know? Do you see the utility there? First of all, it's an invitation to increase our self-awareness. What is it that I am pretending to not know? We're being invited, or we're inviting ourselves, to take inventory, to become aware. What might I be suppressing? What might I be denying? What might I be avoiding? It's also an invitation to examine our motives. Why am I in denial? Why am I fearful to the point of suppressing? And it also gives us an opportunity to reflect on our autonomy. I can be at choice. I can choose to deny or to acknowledge. I can choose to suppress or express. And finally, it catalyzes transformation. When I am self-aware, when I've examined my motives, when I recognize that I'm at choice, I can decide to do something. So again, what is it that I am pretending to not know? In the context of a sermon about Jesus and his mission, I want to say this. War is everywhere. Human suffering, animal suffering, living beings' suffering is pronounced, is horrendous, is at a pitch that is intolerable. There are theologies that suppose that God descends into the world whenever the pitch of suffering rises to such a degree that there is a cry of humanity, and there is a cry of those living beings that are other than human for safety, for rescue, for salvation. Of course, the world is complex. And it'd be awfully reductive to say that the only truth about the world is that war is everywhere. No. Heaven is here. The horse latitudes are here. You know the horse latitudes, the doldrums, boredom, ennui, literal places where the breeze doesn't blow. Hate is here. Love is here. Frivolity is here. Truth, despair, comedy, tragedy, desperation, madness. But Jesus said that he came for those who were sick, and he came with a message. And it seems to me that we're doing a lot of pretending that we don't know what that message is. I don't mean we here in this church. I'm not pointing a finger and accusing anybody here. I'm talking about the fact that in this world where there's a proliferation of armaments, there are guns available online. Just push a few buttons. Just go into your local store and get a suitcase full of ammunition. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not pointing a finger. I'm saying there is an undercurrent of violence in this world that is so dreadfully frightening. You can't comfortably take an airplane anymore. You got to have a book full of your passwords against identity theft. There is violence permeating our culture. And Jesus had a message that was really aimed at teaching how we can overcome and surpass and transcend and transform violence into peace. I'm reading now a short quote from The Basis of Man's Experience of Community. We are a community of liberal religionists who take to our hearts the message of Jesus, to carry it into the world as agents of love, agents of healing, agents of truth and beauty. So Howard Thurman, who taught Martin Luther King Sr., who taught Martin Luther King Jr., who was a mentor to them, who founded, along with a white counterpart, the first interracial fellowship in America, which still is operating in California. He writes, "The conflicts between man and man, between group and group, between nation and nation, the loneliness of the seeker for community is sometimes unendurable. The radical tension between good and evil, as man sees it and feels it, does not have the last word about the meaning of life and the nature of existence." And here's the telling line. He says, "There is a spirit in man and in the world working always against the thing that destroys and lays waste." I'll repeat that. There is a spirit in man and in the world working always against the thing that destroys and lays waste. Always, man must know that the contradictions of life are not final or ultimate. He must distinguish between failure and a many-sided awareness so that he will not mistake conformity for harmony, uniformity for synthesis. He will know that for all men to be alike is the death of life in man, and yet perceive harmony that transcends all diversities and in which diversity finds its richness and significance. I say that to underline the point that the world is complex, and there is heaven here, and there is peace here, and there is beauty here. And we take shelter of those delicious latitudes of truth and beauty to replenish our souls. The spring and the flowers. I walk through the garden. I sit in the shade, or I sit in the sun, and I meditate. And peace is sung into my soul, and I rejoice at that. But I want to look at the fact that there are so few people who are adopting the radical nonviolence that Jesus called for and that he exemplified in his life. I'll say a few more preparatory things before I launch into what I think was central to Jesus' message, which ought to be central to our joyfulness, our celebration of Easter. I worked in hospice, and in hospice, I always kept my hat on. I figured that somebody might say, oh, the chaplain's a biker. But somebody might have said, oh, God, the chaplain's a Hare Krishna. So I just kept my hat on. I figured I'd be of more service to people if I kept low disclosure about myself, because it wasn't about me. When you're with somebody who's dying, it's about that person's transition. It's about that person's sense of integrity. It's about that person feeling safe and loved and confident of their destination. So I covered my hat, and I didn't disclose anything about my identity. I made inquiries. What about you? I'd say, tell me about your spirituality. In other words, it wasn't a loaded question. Tell me about your spirituality. Well, I don't believe there's a God. I'm not going to say, well, you're wrong. I say, tell me about that. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in him also, but tell me. And one of the most remarkable things that happened for me is that I met people who'd say, well, I'm a Christian, and then they'd think, well, actually, a better way to say that is I'm trying to be a Christian. And my antenna would go up. I'd say, a real Christian is here. A real Christian. Somebody who knows that that is a task that's enormous. What Jesus asked of people. It's easy to love your lover. It's easy to love the person who feeds, shelters, praises, and supports you. I want you to love the person who despises you, who acts hatefully towards you. And these people in hospice, on their deathbeds, would say, I'm trying to be a Christian. And they'd smile when they said it. They knew that they were talking truth. And I knew that they were talking truth. I would rejoice to meet a true Christian whenever and wherever. I remember one man, every time I'd walk into his room, he'd light up like the deity just walked in, or his lover just walked in, and he'd say, David, I love you. And it was so, I didn't worry about that man after a while. Yes, he's dying, but he's not going to die. He may breathe his last, but he's just filled with, I love you, David. And he told me that's what Jesus asked, and that's what I do. He died peacefully. And then there was a young woman, and she had a daughter. She was a single mom, and the cancer ravaged her body. She had no more hair on her head. And she looked like a monk, like a Buddhist monk or something. And her face was always full of smiles. And when I'd visit her, she'd say, I can't wait to meet Jesus. I took care of my daughter. I know where she's going to be. I know who's going to take care of her. And I just can't wait to see Jesus. I'm going to complain about that? I just hold her hand and sing songs to her. and she'd sing songs to me. I've met a few other people in high places who I think are real Christians, like the two I just described from my hospice experience. Roy Bourgeois spoke here. Roy Bourgeois, who said, women should be ordained. I have a little postcard, I'm going to put it on my door sometime soon, of a young girl in Catholic school, and the question is, who wants to be a priest? And her hand goes up. I got that from Roy Bourgeois. They excommunicated Roy Bourgeois because he said that repeatedly, and he acted on that. But I consider him somebody who's crossed over, who understands the message of Jesus. He's advocating for women as whole beings, whole people, capable of doing what Jesus said to the first person who saw him after the resurrection. If you believe the narrative, after he rose from the dead, the first person who saw him was who? Mary. And who did he charge with spreading the good news? Mary. And what does that mean? She was a minister. She was a preacher. She was ordained by Jesus. But the church can't see that, so they got rid of Roy Bourgeois. Lorenza Andretti Smith, who sleeps with the homeless, who feels it, knows it. Simone Weil, she converted from Judaism, the culture of her birth, to Christianity. She worked in the resistance. Her brilliant brother was a well-known and celebrated mathematician. She was no less intellectually gifted than he. She wrote, unless one has placed oneself on the side of the oppressed to feel with them, one cannot understand. And she wrote, a hurtful act is the transference to others of the degradation we bear within ourselves. So I want to put my message in the context of who was Jesus? A hurtful act is the transference to others of the degradation we bear within ourselves. She had such perception, precise, of the malignancy that steals our peace and dignity from us. She was a radical person who loved Jesus and got his message and lived it. So I want to put my talk in the context of who was Jesus. Because we are meant to be agents of love. We're meant to be agents of healing. We're meant to be agents of justice. We're meant to be agents of peace. And there's a relationship. Without justice, how can there be peace? Without justice, how can there be peace? Without peace, how can there be happiness? And what joy is there greater than love? Jesus came with a message of peace and justice leading to love. So who was Jesus? First, a little comedy. Who is Jesus? Who was he really? Well, there are three good arguments that he was black. Okay? He called everyone brother. He liked gospel music. He could not get a fair trial. But there are three equally good arguments that Jesus was Jewish. He went into his father's business. He lived at home till he was 33. He was sure that his mother was a virgin, and his mother was sure that he was God. But then there are three equally good arguments that Jesus was Italian. He talked with his hands. He had wine with his meals, and he used olive oil. But then there are three equally good arguments that Jesus was a Californian. He never cut his hair. He walked around barefoot all the time. He started a new religion. But there are three equally good arguments that Jesus was an American Indian. He was at peace with nature. He went to a mountaintop on a vision quest. And he talked about the Great Spirit. But then there are three equally good arguments that Jesus was Irish. He never got married. He was always telling stories. He loved green pastures. But the most compelling evidence of all, 3 proofs that Jesus was a woman. He fed a crowd at a moment's notice when there was no food. He kept trying to get a message across to a bunch of men who just did not get it. And finally, even when he was dead, he had to get up because there was work to do. On a more serious note, John Haynes Holmes, born in 1879, died in 1964, was a Unitarian minister of great renown and great accomplishments, one of which was he was one of the persons who helped found the NAACP. He was a white-bodied American, but he had brotherhood and kinship with black people. He felt that the oppression of black people was intolerable, insufferable, unconscionable. And so he, with colleagues black and white, founded the NAACP. He also helped found the American Civil Liberties Union. He was a radical pacifist. Radical nonviolence was his credo. It got him in trouble with the Unitarians when America entered World War I, and he was kind of gently excommunicated, partly of his own election because he got so much criticism within the AUA that he withdrew. But he came back before the merger in the 60s of Unitarians and Universalists. This is from a sermon that he gave in April 1917, just before America entered World War I. War is an open and utter violation of Christianity. If war is right, then Christianity is wrong, false, a lie. If Christianity is right, then war is wrong, false, a lie. The God revealed by Jesus and by every great spiritual leader of the race is no God of battles. He lifts no sword. He asks no sacrifice of blood. His law, as interpreted and promulgated by the Nazarene, is love one another. Resist not evil with evil. Overcome evil with good. Love your enemies. Such a God and such a law. Others may reconcile with war if they can. I cannot. And what I cannot do, I will not profess to do. This is on the eve of the nation entering a war. This was not a popular position from the pulpit. And later, he said, so long as I am your minister, this pulpit will answer no military summons. Other parish houses may be turned into drill halls and rifle ranges. Ours will not. Other clergymen may pray to God for victory for our arms. I will not. So long as I am priest, this altar shall be consecrated to human brotherhood. In a time of raging hate and brutal passion, I will keep alive that spirit of goodwill toward men, to discover terms of reconciliation, to work out methods of cooperation, to soften hate and dispel suspicion, to spread abroad sweet influences of confidence and healing. How better can we serve our country than by restoring to her that high mission of peacemaking? So who was Jesus? He defined himself. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. So that's an encouragement, Stand strong. The weather's going to be rough. Get your parker. Have your raincoat. Have your umbrella. Know that I love you. Know that it's okay to be hated by people who they can only spend what's in their purse. The only thing that's there is hatred. That's okay. You don't have to bend for that. You have learned how it is said to our ancestors, you must not kill, and anyone who does kill, he must answer it before the court. But I say to you, anyone who is angry with his brother will answer for it before the court. So he's there equating not just actual physical brutality against another, but emotional brutality, mental brutality, to ridicule, to humiliate another, He was drawing a parallel. That's a form of violence that's unacceptable. It's a blot. It's unconscionable. Be free of it. Don't do it. You have learned how it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you, offer the wicked man no resistance. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If a man takes you to law and would have your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone orders you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him. Here he's talking about transforming the paradigm. You know, you strike me, I strike you. You strike me harder, I strike you harder. We kill each other, and our children now are enraged against the other's child. And we perpetuate hatred. And Jesus said, no, don't do that. You know, you can take off your shirt. You can take off your coat. You can keep your dignity by getting rid of your material possessions. But you lose your dignity. You lose yourself when you hold on to flimsy, temporary, ephemeral things with hatred and lust, and you harm another for it. Jesus was unequivocal about this. You've heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be called children of your Father in heaven. Because he makes the sun to rise on evil and good alike, and sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Or again, do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Fear him, rather, who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Now, this was not all so extraordinary in Judaic discourse. In rabbinic discourse, for instance, it was said to humiliate somebody was a form of killing that person. It was a form of bloodshed. How do you know it was bloodshed? The face becomes red. The blood is pouring out into the extremities. You should not do that. I was reading Rabbi Mike Glickman, and he was saying that gossip is considered a 3-tongued serpent in Judaism. The gossiper, the person about whom the gossip is directed, and the person who participates in the process, they all die from that kind of wrong use of words, that words can cause fatality. And that gossip is more dangerous than a knife, because a knife can only harm at short range, but the tongue can harm across the world. So be careful what we say about others, that rather than talk about others, talk with others. Build community. So, I recently went to see John Deere in Norman, Oklahoma. My wife and child and I went there, pilgrims. And John Deere is a Jesuit. The Jesuits don't like him because he's outspoken about our nation has a stockpile of nuclear weapons that's illegal. It breaks all the conventions of peace that grew out of the horrors of World War II. We saw what mass destruction can do to humanity. And so all around the world, nations have come together and signed treaties to ban these weapons. But which nation hasn't signed these treaties? And do you know, I'm talking about America, refuses to sign these treaties, refuses to acknowledge global warming, etc., etc., refuses to admit that we have instruments that have no value but to destroy the world. You can't drop nuclear weapons all over the place and make it a better world. It just escalates the problem of hatred and fear and terror. And we've seen that. I used to travel in the 60s. It was so easy to get on a plane. You just carried your suitcase and you sat down in your seat. Not like that anymore, is it? And if we don't take the message of Jesus to heart, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's already bad enough. So Jesus lives in people like the woman who, in her 20s, with no hair on her head, had a big smile and said, "I just can't wait to see Jesus." She didn't say, why am I dying? It's not fair." She said, "I just can't wait to see Jesus." And she'd sing to me, and I'd sing to her. Or the man who, when I walked into his room, said, "David, I love you." He taught me. He was like a teacher to me. After that, whenever I went into the hospice rooms, I'd say, "So-and-so, I love you." This is what Jesus' message was. Love everyone. And if they act hatefully towards you, continue to love them. And if you can stand in your love, you will transform the hater. May not be on the instant. They may strike you. They may cause you to bleed. They may kill your body. But you will have changed them in some way. And you will not have died. Because it's death to you to become a hater. That's death. To become a hater. To become a terrorist. To become a violent person. That's death. And to be married to peace, to justice, to love, that's life. That's the message of springtime. It's the message of Easter. It's the message of Jesus. Now, I'm going to recommend a poem to you. I'm going to read a couple of lines from it. But it's really about the story of Jesus. But it's really, you might read it and not get that at all, because it makes allusion, it's allegorical. It was written by Robert Graves. He was traumatized. He had post-traumatic stress disorder after being in the war. He wouldn't have a telephone in his room after the war because he got a shock in the trenches from a phone that hospitalized him for days or weeks. And he saw his comrades slain, and he was utterly, utterly disturbed. And he wrote to Juan at the winter solstice. To Juan at the winter solstice. And he wrote, "There is one story and one story only that will prove worth your telling. Whether as learned bard or gifted child, to it all lines or lesser gods belong that startle with their shining such common stories as they stray into." And he goes on, and he's basically talking about resurrection, which we see in the spring, or the trees, as in Greta's homily, which we heard earlier. You know, the trees that appeared to be dead come to life again. It's just an apparent death, not really. So we see that in spring. And Graves was meditating deeply on the fact that through, as he supposes, the goddess, who is half the deity, life comes. He says, "Water to water, arc again to arc, from woman back to woman, bringing 12 peers as witness, both to his starry rise and his starry fall." He's talking about the cycles, which we see reproduced, which Jesus talked about, which, if we believe it, affirmed his, or validated his courage, making it, instead of folly, courage, to accept death when afterwards, "Where is your sting, death? Here I am talking to my friends again." How we understand that? Each to his own, each to her own. How do we understand that message? But there is something that we bear witness to every spring, that from apparent death, life comes. That when each child is born into the world, from nothing but an idea, a hope, a dream, a passion, springs this miracle of a human being, a little girl or a little boy, or a little other in between, interstitial dweller. Whether you're a Buddhist, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, please take to heart the message that has inspired you. Secular humanism, it has a good message. Take it to heart. Come alive with it. Live by it. Because we have to resist evil, not with evil, but with goodness. Lies with truth. Terror with beauty. And we can change the world. And if we can't change the world entirely, we can change ourselves. And as Jimi Hendrix said, I'm the one who has to die when it's time for me to die. That's a very important thing to understand. The way you live, the way I live, it's consequential to you and to me. The way others live, I cannot control. But the way I live, I can control. So I stand for peace. I stand for nonviolence. I stand for love. I stand for the rights and the beauty and the worth and the dignity of everyone. This is the message of Jesus. It's the message of Easter. It's the message of the buds that spring back to life from apparently dead winter. There is one story and one story only that will prove worth your telling. Nothing promised that is not performed. I offer this poem as a kind of follow-up on the sermon. You can find it online, To Juan at the Winter Solstice by Robert Graves. Thank you very much.